Welcome into another episode of Everything is Logistics, a podcast for the thinkers in freight. I am your host, Blythe Brumleve, and I'm happy to welcome in Mike Lombard. He is the owner-operator over at Lombard Trucking, who is currently leased on over at Warren Transport. We're going to be talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly within the trucking industry. It's a long overdue conversation on this podcast. We've had drivers on the show, previously, but it's been a while, and 2023 has been challenging to say the least for folks in supply chain. Drivers are no exception to that. So we got a lot of hot topics to get into. So Mike, welcome into the show.
Blythe, so glad for you to have me here. And I will say I am a thinker of freight. So
Well, that's why we wanted to have you on, because you've been blowing up on social media. You got your own podcast. You've been a driver for a while, but before we kind of get into that, take me back to the days of before you became a driver. What was the reason that you wanted to become a truck driver?
So the main reason why I want to become a truck driver has everything to do with my family's history. My grandfather was one of the owners and a driver of the original Lombard Trucking, which was a business that started. It officially incorporated in 1923 by my grandfather's grandfather, Nicky, and his brother John, who started the original Lombard Brothers Incorporated, and eventually grew to one of the largest motor carriers in the Northeast. They had terminals from Baltimore to Maine. They were a Teamster affiliate, like they were a union gig, and they had a really great brand for the city of Waterbury. They were kind of like identities. Waterbury, Connecticut. They provided an identity for that city. They were a great employer, great jobs. Drivers spent 30 years there, had pensions. So they had an iconic brand throughout the city. I could probably go back to Waterbury, Connecticut right now, and just off sheer last name, possibly be in contention to win a mayoral race if I really wanted to, because that's the type of city Waterbury is. They have names that kind of stuck with that city, who have become like brands because these families had been there. Essentially, they're a part of what made the city so great to begin with. And so the company itself was known to be a great brand. People loved them. They made the economy well. So that positive brand is really what I wanted to try to bring back. And it was always in the back of my mind. I had gotten out of the Marines in 2012, and I knew I wanted to be in business for myself, but it took me a while to figure that out. And it didn't take, and then in 2017, I started to get into logistics working for a wholesaler, a plumbing and heating wholesaler, and that's when I started to learn about, more in operations and dealing with trucks and shipping and receiving. And I think that that's what just led me towards the inevitable, taking extreme ownership of what I want to do career-wise. And my wife and I, we moved to Central Texas, and I was going to launch a trucking career. I didn't have the sights of being an owner-operator like on my eyes at first, but the first thing I wanted to do was reestablish myself. So I got into trucking, and that's what it kind of did. And what I've been trying to do since has been kind of restore that brand of Lombard, of in my actions and what I do. So what I do in the industry is I make the content I make, and I am who I am to try to restore that brand and to make Lombard a name in the freight world again.
And so when you have the unique perspective of seeing transportation and shipping on both sides, so you kind of have that real world experience of knowing where the gaps are with the way that drivers are being treated in this country and at shippers and warehouses all over the country. What, I guess, lessons did you take from those days of working on the receiving end of things into your role today?
Well, it's funny because when I talked to those guys, I asked them how their jobs were, because I would speak to local drivers and guys who came from over the road, and I would always ask them about how it is. And it's funny, even back then, they would bring up issues such as parking around the area, and I would never think about it, especially for the guys who drive the day cabs, because they wouldn't talk about it as much. But guys who came in who did have sleepers and stuff, they would always mention about how, coming up here is really tough and stuff like that. And I'd be like, oh, really? And I wouldn't know much about it. And it's funny, I never even thought about these things until, I'm asked to remember when I when I worked at these places, talking with these guys. But mainly, what people loved about the going to the warehouse that I was at was they were in and out. Like whenever they came to a warehouse like ours, which is like more of a smaller one, it wasn't like a big shipping and receiving place. This is like a plumbing and heating wholesaler. Like if drivers that had come there, they know that they're just bumping the dock, a couple things going in or a couple things coming out, because we would be replenished by these day cabs, regional drivers too, out of a distribution center in New Hampshire that would come down to Connecticut. And this guy, I mean, he loved his job because he came and saw us twice a week, but his type of job was, when he showed up to work, he was already loaded. He would leave, drive down to New Haven, unload, and he'd be unloaded in 30 minutes, and then he's gone. And then he'd get back home, and he's home early, and that was his shift. So like I got to see actually how a good distribution center would run their trucks from that company. So especially on the local side of things, when it comes to scheduling time off, his availability to find parking, what he was making money wise, upward mobility. So, and I got to see that from the receiving end before I even got into the truck myself.
And so what was, I guess, so you moved to Texas and you decide to, become a trucker. What was that process look like for you? Did you go to CDL school? Did you, what does that process look like?
Yeah. So to get my CDL, well, I had to, go through all the, rudimentary processes of like changing my license over to the state of Texas and stuff. But what I did was I looked at companies who I would obviously like pay for your CDL, because I didn't know. I had no idea about getting a CDL. In hindsight, if I did know, and if I can go back, I probably would have maybe taken out a student loan myself and picked a CDL school to go to, knowing full well that depending on whatever jobs you get into, a lot of companies will offer tuition reimbursement, which is actually just probably still taxpayer dollars. But what I did was I had looked online for companies. And I actually had to find and I don't mind saying this because I'm open and honest. I was looking for companies that specifically didn't hair test, because I probably still had some remnants of marijuana in my hair from the time of when I wanted to get my CDL. Because I had, marijuana could stay in your hair for, I don't know, up to 3 months. And I had stopped, I'd stopped smoking weed for a couple months. And I was like, well, I didn't want to risk it. So I found companies that didn't hair test. And this has got to be on the podcast. People need to know, because this is important. Like the fact that there are hair tests for these companies. I mean, to test for lifestyle is just something I don't agree with. Like you're not testing habit. Like hair tests are testing lifestyle, and I think it's a huge invasion of privacy, especially as states have legalized things medically. More than half the country. But that's a different conversation. So I found PAM Transport. They pay for your CDL school, and so I went through their application process. Which was, done online. I qualified for them. I didn't have any like tickets or DUIs, and they paid for me to go to ATDS, which was in Killeen, Texas. So it was about 45 minutes away from where I was living. And I went to that school, and there was a couple other people who were there who were also going to work for PAM that I was there with. But there was also people at that school. There's 3 people I was in CDL school with who were sent there by Texas Workforce Unemployment. So these people were essentially told that if they didn't go to CDL school, they would lose their benefits. So it's almost like the state of Texas, the government, forced them to become truck drivers. I kind of found that a little weird, And
yeah, that's interesting.
And it's crazy the road we've gone to. So much I've learned since meeting guys like Gord and having conversations on some of my show about like hiring practice and stuff. But yeah, so this guy is sent there by unemployment, but. I got my CDL, didn't get an automatic restriction, by the way. I can drive a 10-speed manual. For the drivers listening, I'm not a phony. And I started working with PAM, and it was, this is the CDL Milling Industrial Complex. This is a company where you're 100% a number. They don't, I would talk to my driver manager on the phone, and then I would have a question, and I would call back in 5 minutes, and they wouldn't know who I was. They would need my driver number to get me, and I'll never forget that. There's probably nothing more that'll make you feel more like alone, like when you're like in the middle of nowhere, when you're in Montebello, California, and you have a question about a certain trailer number, or say you do have an issue with a trailer, because whenever you come to trailers, like especially for dropping hooks, they could be damaged, and you talk to them on the phone, get off the phone, and they'll be like, yeah, I forgot I had this question, and then you call them back, and then you're like, hey, so-and-so, it's me, Mike Lombard again. And they'd be like, what's your driver number? And it's like, wait, and it's just not 5 minutes have passed before we spoke, and it's like, you don't know my name. And that's what it was always like. And they would always shuffle you around. Like, I would switch driver managers, like, I don't, almost like, quote, kind of regularly. Like, at one point in time, when I was at PAM, they put me on this dedicated run that was somewhere in Ohio and went between two cities, Huber Heights, and I forget the other city. And it was like this run for, I was moving like Coca-Cola. And I was doing it, and I was told by my driver manager, hey, you're going to help on this lane for a couple days. And I was like, okay. And I did it for probably a week and a half. And at one point I was like, hey, what's the deal here? When am I going to be taken off this? And like, I was actually assigned a new driver manager, wasn't even told that I was. And they were like, oh, you're just on this lane now. And I was like, well, this lane would be great if I lived in Ohio. I was like, but I'm out here. Like, what are you guys trying to do? Like, I'm making less money because I was restricted on the miles. So like my miles got cut because they put me on this lane that needed more trucks to run. And it's like, well, my mileage was reduced because it was a dedicated lane. I was like, why didn't nobody even had the conversation with me? They weren't like, hey, we've got this lane opening up. You'll get X amount of miles per day, per week. Like, I wasn't told that at all. They just threw me on that lane and were like, hey, you're gonna, and like, that was it. It wasn't until I was like, hey, why am I still here? That I'm on this. And it's just like that. So that's seeing like how these mega carriers work as a whole. I eventually got myself on this Walmart dedicated run, which wasn't bad. And the reason why it wasn't bad is because I was in theory working for Walmart at that point. I was just on their rules. Like, I didn't talk to my driver manager at all. I just dealt with Walmart. Like, when I showed up to work, it was the closest thing you can get to being a driver for Walmart. I would just show up to the DC, check in. They'd be like, hey, you're going to grab trailer 1, 2, 3, 4 over here. It's going to go down to this store over in Comfort, Texas, and then you're going to grab an empty and you're going to go to New Caney. And then you'll get your next trip from there. And it was awesome because I was working, because at that point I was on Walmart's, how Walmart runs their supply chain and not how PAM and the mega carriers do. But from there, I ended up meeting a kid who worked for a small carrier out of Northwest Arkansas, R&R Solutions. Phenomenal company. They're actually not just a trucking company. They have their own warehousing. They do a lot of IT stuff. They almost have trucking almost as like just another part of their business to serve customers in a way, because they'll do IT disposition. So they had like 25, 30 trucks, small carrier. And this is when I saw the good side of how a company can treat somebody. For a company driver, they got me home whenever I wanted. I went to multiple weddings back in the Northeast. I would go visit friends in Phoenix. Like, as things would come up, it was very great, laid back. They never bothered you. Essentially, you can run the miles you wanted as long as it worked. If you lived in Florida or something like that, it would be harder for them. But me living in Texas, it definitely matters. Where you live definitely has a factor of what company you work for. But they were great. And then it kind of came to the decision, where I wanted to get, at this point, I felt confident that I think I can get into business. And I have a business partner, good friend of mine, he's my accountant. And we, at the beginning of 2022, made the decision, hey, yeah, let's do this. And so we started looking at buying a truck, and it got really hectic, but we got the truck. But what was awesome about getting the truck is, I did a lot of research, get my own authority versus leasing on. And I did a lot, but I kind of I saw what the lower risk was at that point. And the company I was working for as a company driver, when I told them I was buying a truck, this is how great they were. They were like, hey, we used to have owner operators. We'd love to help you get started. And so I leased on with them at first, and I used, I was on every load board. They let me use every load board for free. And they let me use a 53-foot drive-in for free. We had a good contract set up, 80-20, minimal expenses. And that's where I kind of learned the game. And then towards the end of 2022, saw the writing on the wall with the spot market. Spot market was really teetering. Like, there wasn't really a holiday peak, especially for dry van stuff. And I said, I kind of need to make changes. Like, I definitely can't stay doing van. I had a guy over at Warren Transport, a friend of mine. I talked with them about wanting to run flatbed, and they had, I lobbied my case for it. I had unloaded and loaded pipe trucks at a previous job. I said, hey, I can do this. Give me the securement training. They brought me on, and that's what I've been doing since. So I've been with Warren for the past 6 months, moving agriculture, like John Deere, tractors, oversized loads, combines, conveyor belts, like all sorts of stuff. So that's kind of been the trucking journey, in a whole. Sorry if that was a little little winded, but that's what's got me to
No,
now.
you hit on a bunch of things that I'd like to kind of expand on a little more. So first of all, the driver manager, for folks who may not be familiar, your driver manager is what you're essentially from what I understand, it's the first person that you're almost assigned to as soon as you complete CDL school. They're the ones responsible for, making sure you're taken care of and you have everything that you need. And they're really like your point of contact, your closest, I guess, maybe like work friend in the office is your driver manager. Is that accurate?
Oh yeah, like with Pam, like you're not going to talk to anybody else. They do have. There's this one guy who I think is their boss who will call you like monthly, and I think that's like probably part of their. It's probably part of their employee retention. I'd imagine they do because he would call like once a month and just be like, "Hey, are you happy?" Like stuff like that, and they'll do check. I remember they would do checkups, but yeah, like any questions you have when you send a Qualcomm message or when you send an e-log, yeah, they're who you talk to for everything.
And so for switching up a manager on you and not telling you, is that a case of that driver manager probably just, moved on to another job, or they were just assigned to somebody else and you had no idea?
Oh, they just the personnel staff would change so much,
Hmm.
at least that I saw, because I remember towards the end of my time at Pram Transport, my original driver manager ended up, getting a promotion, and she worked, I think, on the maintenance side of things now. So if you had a breakdown, because I remember I had I had a DPF sensor go on me, and I remember like having like calling a breakdown or somebody, and it was her who picked up the phone, and I recognized her, she didn't recognize me, and it's like. So they'll have personnel that will move all the time, and then all of a sudden you'll get a call and be like, "Hey, so and so's over here now. I'm your driver manager," and it just hits you because you'll have home time coming up, or you'll be doing X, Y, Z, and it's just so hard to, it's hard to coordinate. It's I don't like I said you can the vibe I got and the vibe you get is I'm a number here. Like
Mm-hmm.
they look at I imagine they're looking at a board of and they have trucks truck numbers, and they just kind of move them around to different columns, like here's Joe, Christina, so and so, whatever. They'll have a list of names of DMs, and they just like move the trucks over to name after name based on the demand of where they need trucks to go. And that it's like as if they don't realize like, oh, there's a human operator in that truck. That's like the vibe like I immediately got. And there's a lot of people, there's drivers who will probably share that sentiment, because especially at these bigger companies, the Werners, the Schneiders, like it's just these companies that run in the thousands of units. That's just it's how they operate.
Have they always been like that with the way that, treating drivers as a number per se? Have they always been like that? Or is this just the nature of, maybe the industry growing really fast and they can't keep up? What are your theories behind why they treat drivers as a number?
What's crazy is I don't know, based, just off my experience, I don't know if that's the way it's always has been, because you'll talk to older guys who say it used to be different, but in reality, what's crazy is pre ELD mandate and stuff, and even pre like cell phones, so to speak. So even if we go back early 2000s, 1990s, like maybe they were less treat you like a number because you didn't talk to them as much. Now there's all this surveillance technology on top of you, where you feel as where they have all this access to all of your data, your location, where you are, your hours, where you're going. They have all this access to your data, yet there's still this disconnect of treating you like a number, where back in the day they barely would contact you, and guys, the turnover was still lower, and it was it was probably people describe it as a little bit better. So it's like I'm curious too if it was always like that, but I think the data is in the turnover rates at some of these companies. We're looking at these major companies with turnover into the triple digits at some point. So was it like that 10, 15, 20 years ago? I'm not sure.
And that kind of leads me into my next question, because the upper echelon of driving jobs, from what, anecdotally from what I see on TikTok and, other social media platforms, that Walmart is really the upper echelon as far as like everything that you could want out of a truck driving job. And that is the ultimate goal is to drive for Walmart. Is that a safe assumption?
I'd say it's definitely one of the safer assumptions now, even on Twitter. I mean, we've been engaging in conversation with more Walmart drivers. The Walmart drivers, and a lot of this information has gotten out there, and like how you said, Walmart being this upper echelon of what a company should be, it's all over. TikTok has become the place for drivers, and Walmart drivers have been coming on there and telling people, hey, this is what we're getting. Like, Walmart's getting PTO. Like, this is our schedule. How it is. It's regional. It's crazy to think that of all companies, it's Walmart who's
Yeah.
because Walmart's technically not a trucking company. When you think
Right.
about it, Walmart is in the retail business, and they're the ones who are out there treating the drivers with like the most respect and respecting their home time, giving them PTO, the benefits, the better pay, all that sort of stuff. I'd say personally, like if it comes to unless you love flatbed, unless you love a different type of niche freight, like if you're just into trucking because you like to truck, Walmart's become the job to be. They become the model of how a carrier should be. I said it on a previous I said it on a previous show that essentially they became exactly what should have happened to carriers post deregulation.
Hmm.
But instead it has become this spiraling race to the bottom that it turned into this just race to the bottom, as opposed to, okay, let's maintain the standard of what the job was pre-deregulation, and
Has
Walmart's the
Walmart
one who's shined.
always had, I guess, the best perception or the best reputation when it comes to treating drivers, or is this something that they've grown into or evolved into?
I think they definitely evolved into it, because pre Walmart shining, it was the union outfits that were the better jobs, because they came with regular pay raises, they came with seniority, they came with better scheduling, the pay, the benefits, like the health insurance. It was before Walmart, it was the unions who were really the better employers to work for, especially back in like the 60s and 70s.
And I'm not sure if you know the answer to this or not, but I would be curious to know how long Walmart has had company drivers, or if they've used 3PLs in the past, like, some major other retailers. So I would be curious to know how long that they've had company drivers versus, just using like a 3PL.
I want to say it's been, like I said, I can't speak on this exactly because I think Sam Walton himself was a driver.
Oh, wow.
Like
Huh.
he was in a truck, and like I think that's where the respect for drivers comes from. Because I remember when I was pulling Walmarts out of Seymour, Indiana, they had a big picture on a wall of Sam Walton outside one of their trucks, like in a gate, and it was like this kind of like a motivating picture on the wall they had about basically how crucial the job of being a trucker was. Like it was like a motivational picture of like how awesome you are to drive for Walmart. And like it had a picture of Sam Walton and had it like some quote he said about how the business doesn't run without the trucks, and about how they're the most integral part. So it's like I think they've had company drivers essentially since the get-go.
Yeah, I just did a quick Google search, and this is, about his pickup truck, but it definitely has the impression that he has always cared about that. Walmart founder Sam Walton has always cared about, the drivers. And he said he continued to drive an old beat up, F-150 despite being able to afford any vehicle he wanted. Quoting, or he was quoted as saying, "What am I supposed to haul my dogs around in a Rolls Royce?" When it comes to his vintage truck, and then there's other, memorabilia about, his leadership, and the Walmart museum with drivers being a central focus. So that's really cool to hear the ins and outs, because I would have assumed that a big company like Walmart would have succumbed to the other things that other big carriers, some of the mega carriers, as you said, have affected them, that Walmart would be affected by that as well. But it seems like they found a really nice niche for themselves, and just treating drivers with respect. Who would have thought, in that regard? So I guess my next question is, because we kind of talked about a little bit about, recruiting, because recruiting and retention seem to be the hot button issues, and maybe not hot button issues, but recruiting drivers in particular, the infamous, we have a driver shortage that has never ever really existed, that's promoted by associations like the ATA. But really it should be more of a stronger focus on retention, because it sounds like the company that you worked for a while, if they would have treated you as a person instead of just a number, then you would have stayed with them, thus making their CDL investment and hiring investment in you worthwhile. Would you say that retention is something that more companies should be focused on?
like undoubtedly it's a retention issue. Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the ATA and their false narrative and their agenda of pushing this driver shortage narrative, something they've done for over a decade. And it's so funny, and the data proves time and time again that it's false. Yet, there's all this stuff on the, there's so much fact checking and independent fact checkers out there who love to call out misinformation. And I'm curious why it's not on every tweet of every news article that continues to be able to get away with posting about this 80,000. I'd love to know where the fact checkers are on that, because it's been proven time and time again that it's just not true. This is all related to retention, but the fact checking stuff, that's a whole other argument. I'll have to take it up with Elon on Twitter. But it is retention, and you could see this in the rest of the working world. You could see this in the tech industry is really big on their recruiting and retention and what they offer for employee benefits, what they offer on the job, the things they offer. You see this at even the company I worked at, the wholesaler I worked at. They offered things like profit sharing that you get, and that invested in things into your retirement fund. There's so many other industries everywhere. Whether it's working in, like I said, the tech industry is big on it because they're all about recruiting top talent. Like, if you want top talent, you need to be offering something at your business, at your company, or else why aren't they going to go work for the next guy? And we're seeing this happen now in the industry. Except what's really happening is what these companies are offering drivers is so bad a lot of them quit the industry altogether. And there's your shortage. Your shortage comes from people just quitting the industry altogether because it's not worth it. Because the hours worked and what they're putting in isn't worth not being home, the pay, the disrespect, being treated like a number. I mean, even down to, even sometimes it's not so much the pay, but the benefits, like being away from home. We're at this point now where being away for long periods of time. Look, for some people, I get it. Some people want that life and to choose it. That's great. This isn't for them. We're talking about the standard. We have to look at things on a macro scale. Like, I know drivers who live on the road. There's married couples who do that, where they'll just, kind of do the RV life, where they'll buy a truck, husband and wife, run as a team. They live on the road. There's people who do that, but that's not what's sustaining our economy. That's not that's not how freight is moving at all times. Like, yes, there's a small 10% of people who will live on the road, but for the most part, as a career, these people are out for 3 weeks at a time. When it comes to retention, like I said, most major carriers, they don't offer PTO until after you've worked there for a year. Mind you, working there requires you to be out 2 to 4 weeks at a time, so you're not home on weekends. You're not there's so many qualities of life you don't get. You have to live on the road. Essentially, their home time is 1 week out for 1 day home. So it's like, so if you want 4 days at home, you essentially stay out for 4 weeks. And then, so for doing that, for staying out possibly most people, like when I was with Pam, I would stay out 4 to 6 weeks at a clip. So you do that. You don't even get any PTO until after a year. And then the PTO you do get is 1 week. And it's not a week worth of what you'd get in driving, because you can hammer 3,000 miles in a week. Even in a governed truck at Pam Transport, I've gotten 3,000-mile weeks before, if you run out your clock and every day and do a reset. So they're not paying you what you can do for a week. They adjusted off this 40-hour scale, paid at like $15 an hour or something, or $18 an hour. So they pay you only for 40 hours. So they're not even paying you for actually a full week worked. And this is the standard across so many of these companies. And, they just, and during this whole time, you're working where you're at, you're at these shippers and receivers for sometimes 2 to 6 hours. You're not paid for that, so that cuts into your miles. You're beridden to the electronic log. You're beridden to this surveillance technology, like new driver-facing cameras. You have all this stuff that's put on the driver, and they wonder, how come nobody's staying? Like, why are they leaving? Well, I could tell you for what companies, like, if you want top talent, you need to offer top benefits and pay. And what's happening is, since the top talent, or you're not retaining talent at trucking companies, that all has a cost. That rolls out to your safety, so you're going to have less safe drivers on the road because they're all going to be newer. And this is just a cost that rolls onto the consumer, because that level of turnover eventually makes its way to the grocery store shelf, whether people like to admit it or not.
And so when we talk about, all of the, I guess, the mass surveillance that's going on with drivers in particular, is there any kind of data and reporting for like, warehouse, like unloading time, loading time, or is there any kind of, I guess, come to Jesus moment for those kind of employees that, because I would imagine that if they increase their efficiency of loading and unloading trucks, that they would get more product in, they would become more efficient, the store would become more efficient. Like, why aren't those same, I guess, surveillance technologies being placed on those workers as well? And I'm not advocating for any kind of surveillance technology, but if they're going to use data in one way, I'm just curious if you have any insight as to why they're not using that data and surveillance in other ways where it could be more impactful.
Well, it has to do with the stakeholders in that transaction. So the carrier's already been paid for the job done, and the shippers and receivers have all been paid. The person in the middle, the driver, is the only one who suffers. So that one driver who had to wait for 6 hours, in the macro scale to these people, it doesn't really matter because the goods are being sold and the services are being transported one way or another, and that transaction's already been made. So there's no incentive in place anywhere to to incentivize the shippers and receivers to either load or unload faster, because it doesn't matter either way. And so when it comes to, do I think that implementing some sort of timers or ELD on shippers and receivers is the answer? But no, I don't think so. I mean, if companies do, I'm sure there are companies that probably, I mean, I know when I worked for that wholesaler, that distribution center in New Hampshire, the VP of operations up at that DC, if trucks were at doors for like longer than 45 minutes, he would absolutely like blow his head off. He'd be like, why is this door still why is this truck still at a door? Like he would hate it. And I'm sure that there are warehouses that do probably have timers on that stuff, and they time like how long trucks are at docks, and they probably have that data. What they do with it, I don't know. It's definitely not in the norm, but we're coming to the point now where, hey, the government may need to actually step in. And I know people balk at that, and the libertarians of the world, oh, why do that? Keep the government out of it. Well, the government's got into it. The government's in it either way. They're already here, and what it's doing is it's causing mass turnover. It's causing safety issues. It's completely unfair, to the largest stakeholder in the industry, the driver. And so if you do something like pass legislation that's currently floating around the House, the Guaranteeing Overtime for Truckers Act, if you have to pay these drivers for their hours worked and hours sitting at these receivers, that's the incentive for shippers and receivers to then go, okay, we can't have these trucks sitting, or else, they're going to want to renegotiate rates, because the carriers are then going to go, hey, we're going to need, you guys are going to need to pay us more money so we can pay these drivers more. And that's going to get the shippers and the shippers and receivers are going to be like, okay, hey, what if we actually, no matter what, if they're not out of here in an hour, then we'll figure it out. That's the incentive they need. They need something. It's gotten to the point to where they need an actual kick in the butt from the government to do it. And all it really involves is just paying people for their time worked, which happens in every other industry. Like if you went to any other, people consider trucking blue collar. If you try to tell a pipe fitter, a welder, a plumber, or somebody that they're going to have to be at a house, or they're going to be there at a certain time, and they're not going to get paid for it, but they have to be there, they'll absolutely they'll be ripping mad about that. But for drivers,
you'll get charged for that somehow.
Yeah, they're going to charge it for you. They're 100% going to charge it for you. If you need a road call, if you have a truck breakdown, again, I had to get a road call once because I had a coolant hose go on me. That road call, you start paying for that road call for that mechanic to come to you the second from when that truck leaves his house. Like that's when the timer starts. So that's for a road call mechanic. How come that doesn't happen if I'm at a shipper or receiver? I'm not saying the second I bump the dock, like, oh, you have to pay me from that starting minute. That's just unrealistic. But if once we're getting at the 90-minute mark and, things aren't happening, if you're at a place, like I said, I've been at grocery DCs, Elizabeth, New Jersey. I was there for 6 hours. And I was there for 6 hours because they unloaded me in 45 minutes, but then they needed to count all the stuff. That transaction is between the shipper and the receiver. You loaded that material. They sealed it themselves. They didn't want me to seal it. So that I carried the freight. The driver carries it. If there's a discrepancy in the quantity, has nothing to do with the motor carrier. That's between the shipper and receiver. You don't just get to freely keep a driver there and waste my time. And I can't bill that back, even as an owner operator. I can't bill that back. Yeah, you could shake the broker down for detention if he's going to give it to you, but that's a losing battle. Like I've tried to shake brokers down for detention time and time again. They don't give a crap. I had this happen with a guy with Nolan Transport Group. This guy, I blew his phone up for 2 weeks, and this guy, and then he had the nerve once when I asked him for another load I threw out a rate and he dropped it down $500 cheaper. And I said, hey man, don't you think you owe me for the 6 hours I had to spend at this HEB DC? And he was like, oh, that's my bet on that. Sorry man, can't go above this. And it's like, what are we doing here? It's that's from the owner operator side, and I know I'm kind of going off, but back to the original point, circling it back. The incentive now is at this point of, we probably need to do something that's going to help drivers out, and I think you'll incentivize shippers and receivers to speed things up because it's the rising tide that lifts all boats.
I was going to say, why are they taking, so long, 6, 8, sometimes 10 hours to get you unloaded? Is it just, the inefficiencies within their operation, or they're trying to just, is it just taking them that long to count merchandise, or are there other reasons that factor in too?
Sometimes it's definitely the counting of merchandise because that's not every single load, but I don't know what takes so long because because when you go to these places, especially since COVID, you're not allowed in. The check-in process is very, very separated. I encourage anybody, just go on TikTok and search truck driver waiting, and you'll find guys who will be and it'll just be a clip of videos 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, and they won't even know. Some of these DCs are ones like Walmart and Amazon. You have to drop the trailer at a door, unhook from it, go to a staged parking area, and then they'll call you. The Walmart DC in Bentonville, Arkansas, the headquarters, the belly of the beast. I went to deliver there once, and this wasn't when I was pulling Walmarts. Like I said, being a Walmart driver, good. Delivering to a Walmart DC, not so much. There's a sign right on the door in big caps, or not on the door, on the glass window. It says, "We have 4 hours from when you give us your paperwork to unload you. Do not come back, within that time." Just off the rip, that's the standard.
Setting the tone.
Yeah, they set the tone with a piece of paper printed out with black bold letters. We have 4 hours from when you give us your paperwork. So it's what power do I have at that point? How do you negotiate that? What can I do to get out of there quicker? At this point, there's nothing anybody can do to reduce that time. It's one of those times where, nope, maybe the government needs to intervene, be like, hey, you want to keep these people waiting? Well, it's affecting the turnover in the industry, and it's a cost on the consumers. So you're actually going to have to start paying drivers for their waiting time, and if you don't, then we'll either stop pulling out of this DC or something. I think it brings people to the negotiating table at least, because the conversation's not happening. The conversation's happening on the Lombard Trucking Show and the Everything is Logistics podcast. The conversation needs to start happening between these shippers, receivers, the carriers, and the government, or else, like I said, eventually the turnover becomes unsustainable.
And that, I would think that there would be, the ATA, as we mentioned earlier, or some of these other associations, I would think that would be front and center for them to be prioritizing, because it affects everyone. It affects everyone throughout the entire supply chain. So why let these inefficiencies, which sound almost like power trips more than, maybe just overworked individuals? Because at first, I hear about these stories, and I thought they were, like you said, more COVID related. A lot of people wearing a ton of hats, trying to get their job done. Maybe it's not all their fault, but when you set the tone as your time doesn't matter and my time does, I think that there's a larger issue at play. And I would think that some of these associations would be prioritizing that. And I'm curious, is there any theories as to, why they're not going after, some serious issues that affect everyone versus, some of these other issues that are just non-existent, like you said, the made-up driver shortage that's been perpetuated for the last decade?
Well, yeah. So for the ATA, they don't care about this at all, because this is how they maintain control maintain the majority control of the industry. If they can keep the turnover high, and they can keep the drivers and they can keep the drivers essentially non-unified, the more they can keep them divided, the more they can keep them arguing, the more they can keep them just in this meat grinder. It's way easier for them to control, because the ATA doesn't speak on behalf of drivers. if they did, then we wouldn't have issues like parking. We wouldn't have these retentions. ACA's been around for 90 years. What do they do? What do they actually do for drivers? If as an organization, and they're the ones with the large. They have the largest amount of lobbying dollars to the government. They've been around for 90 years. Why do we have all these problems? If they've been around for essentially the history of the entire trucking in this country, why do you have these problems? All they care about is control, because the ATA is just an arm of these large companies, and all these companies are publicly traded megacorps that also have shareholders who happen to work in our government, and so it's just this vicious circle of between the government, the ATA, and these large companies. They need to make sure that they can do what they can to make things at the most ruthlessly profitable for them at the cost of actual people's jobs.
And it almost sounds like you're more incentivized to keep the problem going instead of to actually fix it.
Oh yeah, that's exactly, and they plan on doing that. And some people may disagree with me, but there's an organization out there called America Without Drivers, and they're doing this, and they keep the problem going. And they do not want to fix these problems like parking, pay, retention. They don't want to fix these because there's so much money invested in the tech to remove the drivers out of the vehicle. So that's the overall end goal, is that there's so much money involved in technology, billions of dollars, to get drivers out of the truck, because at that point in time, when they're able to remove the driver from the vehicle, you've removed they're able to seize control of the operation. So the people who can afford that technology, who can drive trucks without drivers, will only be 7 to 12 major companies, your Knight, Swift, Werner, Schneider. So only the large companies, all the medium-sized carriers and down, even the guys who own 50, 100 trucks, they'll never be able to afford it, because the technology is so expensive, and it's basically the holy grail of what they need, that all the big companies will seize control of the industry. And essentially what would happen is trucking would go the way of the railroads, where it's only owned by very few companies, and then we're at a point to where the federal government has ownership of the supply chain. People think that sounds tinfoil hatty. People think it's conspiracy. But when you look at where some of these people work, when you look at Elaine Chao, who is Mitch McConnell's wife, being involved with Too Simple, when you look at these people who are on all the the board of directors for these mega carriers, and the people where the ATA people all came from and who they're all invested with, it's all very much connected into this one wheel, and that's what they're doing. They need the problem to keep going, so that way they're continually incentivized to get the drivers out of the trucks sooner, because that's what will happen if we don't get ahead of these issues. If we don't get ahead of the tech, and if we don't get ahead of just making this a better career for people for generations to come, so that's the biggest thing. You're talking about a job here that is the number one job for high school educated males in all 50 states in the country. And when you talk about eliminating that, the societal backlash, and I think the knockdown, what it will do to the overall economy would be detrimental. But it allows the ATA, that's just the casualties of war to these people. And it's all just for them to maintain control.
And so I guess you kind of hinted to it with the tech side of things. So autonomous vehicles have been touted for years and years. I mean, admittedly, I've been to conferences and events where you see these big autonomous vehicles. The LiDAR cameras that are on the side of them are admitted. I'm an archaeological fan, so LiDAR technology is truly fascinating to me. And to see some of this technology up close in person is very impressive. But I still don't see a world where that truck is driven without a driver inside. Is that what you feel like is happening with the driver position? Is that a lot of these big companies would rather just have no drivers, and they foresee a future where it's just all autonomous vehicles all the time?
They definitely see it that way. And now the ones who are trying, there's a lot of gaslighters out there who are trying to say, oh, it'll never have a truck. And they're doing that with photographers now too when it comes to AI, because the people who are really on the firing line first now, accountants, photographers, graphic designers, and they're trying to say, oh, we'll always need them. We're going to need a human to check them. That's all smoke and mirrors. And they're doing the same thing with trucking. Oh, it's still going to need a human operator. We can't get people to stay in the seat to drive the truck. And they're going to expect to now probably drive down the wages. And you're going to have a human be in the truck and do nothing? and then be away from home, and they're not even going to drive it at all and have no autonomy. They've released all autonomy from the truck. The operator's just going to sit there in the sleeper and literally do nothing. Or if anything, they're going to stay in the driver's seat with their hands off the wheel and just be able to snap to for an emergency. Like all of a sudden, after the truck's been moving for 14 or 15 hours or something like that, even the thought of that is unreasonable. The definite main goal is to remove the driver from the vehicle. They look at it as a driver's salary to these companies is pitched as it's a part of their budget sheet. It's an operational cost. They think the salary, they just call the salaries back to that number thing. Mega carriers look at drivers as just a number. They see their salaries as an operational cost, when really that operational cost is a salary that goes to a human being who buys homes, has kids, buys food, and is a participant in this economy and in this market. And eventually, when you do this with this technology, eventually you're going to run out of people's money to start take. Because you're going to want them to keep consuming. Well, when you've taken the jobs away of photographers, journalists, graphic designers, truckers, like I said, number one job of high school educated males in all 50 states in America, when you eliminate that job, where do they spend their money? Where are they supposed to go? How do you repurpose them? You can't just, and what are you going to do? You're going to tell them to learn to code? Eventually the coders are going to be out of a job. Eventually the coders are going to be taken over by the AI. So, I hate to sound very slippery, slopey, and doom and gloom, but this is just why I'm so passionate on solving these issues, and how, if the American people knew about these issues and realized how just unsafe and unsatisfactory they were, because in other industries and other jobs, if they couldn't do things like if you couldn't go to the bathroom at your job, if you weren't allowed to use the bathroom, oh, sorry, you can't use the bathroom. We're actually not letting the accounting team use the bathroom anymore because a couple of the accountants were really dirty. This is something women drivers deal with on a daily basis. Oh, we don't let drivers use the bathroom because a couple made them dirty. Oh, you can't park here because they make it dirty. So just to the point where going to work and coming home from work as a truck driver, so starting and stopping your day and doing regular things throughout your life has become a roadblock. If this was in any other industry, streets would be, people would be revolting, people would be rioting. But like I said, they've driven the floor down with this race to bottom with bringing in truck drivers. We're at the point now where state governments are forcing people to go to truck driving school. And when you can do that, when you can keep the talent turning over, when you can keep the talent pool low, you're not going to have any pushback, and you're not going to have people who are going to stand up for the job because they don't really care.
What do you mean by the state forcing people to become drivers? Is it more like a work release program, or how does that work?
Oh, like I said, I mentioned that earlier about how when I went to CDL school, 3 people were there sent by the unemployment office. They said, we're going to cut off your unemployment if you don't go to CDL school, because the CDL school itself is taxpayer subsidized, and so they just send these guys there for free. But that's how they threaten them to get them off unemployment. So they're, in a sense, being forced to become a truck driver. They're not being forced to go to school for anything else, but they're being forced to go to school being a truck driver. That's what I mean by like the state forcing people to do it.
Yeah, that's I've never heard that before. I would assume that maybe you would have an option to choose from a variety of different trades to pick which one you would like the most. But if you're being forced into one and only, that definitely sounds like some lobbying efforts that are going on there.
Mm-hmm. The ATA and their agenda and its consequences.
Are there any companies besides Walmart that are doing a good job of treating their drivers with respect and to make it to an attractive career that allows for that retention of the driver for 30 years, like you said before?
Yeah, I'd say the company I used to work for, R&R Solutions, they're great. Like most of the drivers there have stayed for 5+ years. The only reason they left is they wanted to get their own truck and move freight for some friends. They made connections to do it that way, which is good. Any employer encourages that. Like I said, R&R was so nice when they found out that I bought a truck. They wanted to help. That's a sign of a good company. Of when you're gonna quit, they want to help you get to the next level. They love that, and so them as is how they operated. What their pay scale was, what their PTO was, what their bonuses were, their mileage or safety bonuses, just how they treated you with the absolute the utmost respect. When I was there for orientation, gave me a company car to drive around, paid for the hotel for me to stay at. Like they when they were still waiting on some paperwork, they they wanted me to get paid, so they let me drive one of their day cabs and do local routes. And so they'll get they'll keep you rolling, get you moving. But another company I really want to give a huge shout out to is a company called Central Oregon Truck Lines. They're a flatbed company, and they have employees not paid by the company who post on TikTok quite often about what their paychecks are, and they go into detail about what they're paid per mile, how they get raises, their TARP pay. They are a flatbed company. They give you the option of wanting to drive a 10-speed manual, so they're not forcing you into trucks maybe you don't want to be in. So they want guys to be in trucks they want. They like to they give them like the most autonomy they can, which is the biggest thing. Is like giving the driver the autonomy. But then on the same way, they're what they have for benefits on PTO. And what however close, if you live in a certain area, you could probably get home every week. I'm in a Facebook group where somebody was talking about how they had a load get canceled that was supposed to take them home, and Central Oregon paid for their flight home, to be home for Memorial Day weekend. Think like getting a rental, like paying for their rental cars if they had a breakdown, like insane stuff. The company essentially bends itself over backwards for their drivers, and this is coming from their drivers. And I had one of their drivers on my show who went into detail about how that's why he's there. Like he wanted to buy his own truck too and kind of do his own thing, and he just came to the decision of why would I? When he put his paycheck versus what he'd get as owning his own truck, and then the benefits of how often he can go home, everything like that. When he weighed the options, he's like, I'm better off. Like my quality of life is better here at this specific company. So Central Oregon Truck Lines, I have to give them a shout out. And I'm sure there's many others, and I know that there's others. I always like talking to people on my show who have good companies to talk about, because it's that information's hard to find. When it comes to finding a good company to work for, it's either through word of mouth or meeting people. And you're not going to find them online, because if you search best trucking jobs, the ones that come up are the ones that just pay the most amount of money in SEO ads.
Yeah, they've hacked the SEO system in order to make that happen and make for their listing to appear higher. I know all too well about those different tactics. But separately, I will say that another trucking company based in Dallas, Texas, it is Dallas, Texas, BCB Transport. Full disclosure, they're a client of mine, but they are very rare in that they have a 5-star review on Google, and they create a ton of great content for their drivers. They're always, preaching a culture of safety. So there are some out there, but I've always just wondered, what kind of benefits are being structured at some of the smaller carriers versus the larger carriers, and how do those compete? But it sounds like the larger carriers are the smaller carriers are almost, with their benefits and the things that they actually care about, there's a lot of lessons that could be learned there, from the bigger companies. Or on behalf of.
And it gets really tough because with finding that good respectable carrier, because then we get into the argument of 1099 versus W-2, and some people think that you can possibly pay less in taxes off of 1099, but there are a lot of small carriers out there who are kind of fly by night. They have older modeled equipment, and they just kind of need guys in trucks. And yeah, they'll treat them right and run them whenever they want, but there's still no benefits there. There's no retirement. There's no 401k. There's no there's no pension or that. There's no PTO really. So they'll pay these guys, because I see it all the time. Especially it's popular in Texas. There'll be guys who have 8 trucks, they're pulling containers out of Galveston or what have you, and they'll pay you 70 something cents per mile or something, but there's no PTO, there's no there's still no incentives to it. I wouldn't have a reason to go do that. So that a lot of people will maliciously recruit off of saying we'll pay percentage, or we'll pay you 1099 at X amount of cents per mile, and it's like, but you're still running yourself into, it's not sustainable as a career. Like that's not where you want to be career-wise, because most people eventually have families. Most people want houses. And when you're a 1099 guy, it's really hard to get a house. So it's like that, the way the structure is set up for where people can go work or how they work is really tough.
And so, with all of, I guess we've covered a lot of topics. We're really, hitting into a lot of the bigger problems that exist and permeate throughout the trucking industry. And you hinted to it earlier, but you talk about a lot of these issues on your show, the Lombard Trucking Show. And so, give us a sense of, you're obviously very educated and passionate on these topics. Is that primarily the reason why you wanted to start up your own show?
Yeah, I'd say it's definitely a part of it. That's where it eventually led itself to. Because the reason why I wanted to start making content was to tell my story. Because I was learning about trucking from other people's stories. At first, when I started driving, I was like, I don't want to put myself out there. I don't want to embarrass myself. How the internet can be ruthless. I didn't want to fall victim of any. I didn't want 100 people calling me a dumbass or I did it wrong or you're stupid. But then eventually I was like, well, you know what? If I could share my corner of things, that could help because that's the thing. I saw other problems people were having. I was like, well, let me put my story out there and start just telling about, talking about what my day to day is. And then as as I kept talking about it, I kept learning and then I kept seeing the issues and I was like, whoa, now wait a minute. I feel as though I kind of felt obligated, like, hey, we need to talk about this stuff because I don't think this is right and I don't think we're in a sustainable I don't think we're in something that's sustainable. And then I got my own truck and learned even more just about things going on in the market. It just absolutely exploded. Like bust the doors wide open on learning so much, and I just met so many more people that's where it is now. It's like, hey, I want to start having these conversations with as many people as I can, and get this content out there. And along the way, I can rebuild my brand alongside of it because I come from I come from a good place of trying to unify rather than try to diversify and split the issues. And there's things I think people can come together on in this industry is, hey, we could probably fix parking. Truckers probably deserve a little bit of a raise. And hey, also they're doing a job that can kill you. Like, so we're at this point to where, the job itself isn't the healthiest job. It requires living on the road. It requires you having to do things like, maintain your healthy eating. You're sitting for long periods of time, which isn't good for you. All of that are factors into this recruiting and retention because when you are unhealthy, when you are not taking care of yourself, you are not as coherent and not as likely to self-advocate for all the issues around you. And for all, for by any sense of this, when you are in a position to where you are, unhealthy, weak, and docile, you're not going to think you do deserve these things. So you just have passive aggressive, or projections outward. So they don't care. They think oh, I'm going to wait at this shipper receiver for a while. I guess that's life. I guess I deserve this. And that's where it goes. And so that's another part of the reason why I twisted content is because I've been going through a health journey and a health and fitness journey and trying to become the best possible version of myself during that pathway. I've just learned that personally, I know my worth. And so in being over the road and staying physically fit and doing things like training to run full marathons, during this journey, I've realized that I'm worth more. I've realized that I deserve more. I'm not just a truck driver. I'm Lombard. Like that's who I am and what I bring to the table. Like when I'm out here delivering your freight, like I'm the face of, I'm the face for Warren Transport when I'm delivering certain the freight, but I'm also the face for myself and my own brand. And that applies to every single driver. Like they need to realize that, hey, fit right now or not, hey, you are actually worth more. You're worth 100% more. So when it comes to truck parking, when it comes to you getting more pay, yes, these drivers deserve it. So I come at this from the foundation of, hey, if we start taking control of our health, personal excellence, this is for drivers, and this is really for anybody. Your personal excellence as a person is the number one rebellion in all this. Because if everybody could start to come together on their health and fitness, taking care of themselves, becoming elite versions of themselves, because when they do that, they're going to want to know more. It happens in this health journey, because as your physical health improves, so does your mental health. And all I want to do, besides, be healthy and work out, is I just want to keep learning about what brokers to do, learning about what the customer service department does at Warren, learning about what every role does, so I become better. So that way, when push comes to shove, oh no, I know what you guys are talking about. I know what you do. I'm worth more. I'm not just a truck driver. And that's why I'm making the content I do from the position I do, because I want other drivers to know dude, you're worth it. You guys are worth it. You're better than how the government's treating you. You're better than how the shippers and receivers are treating you. You're better than how these mega carriers are treating with you. You are, a lot of guys, you go on TikTok, they'll say, I'm the lifeblood of this country. I'm a driver. I do this hard job. I do this. Okay, do the hard things as well to keep yourself, elite and mentally and physically fit, and then see, how they treat you. Then see, like, you when you become a force to be reckoned with, they're not going to keep, they're not going to push you over. Like I said, they like it, and this is a societal thing. They want you weak. They want you, tired. They want you sick. They want you dependent. And they're doing that with the labor industry of the trucking market. They're keeping them weak because they're at the point they'll just quit. They're just quitting, and the more they keep quitting, keeping it going, the better. So the number one way to start improving today, some of these things, start doing the hard things, getting fit, and taking care of yourself, and that's kind of where I aim my, I stand on the platform of that with my content, and then with that voicing and talking about the issues at hand, like parking, like pay, like these big carriers and the ATA's agenda. And it gives me a solid grounding to, really speak on this stuff from.
And I love that you brought up the fitness aspect of it, because I remember very early on, during COVID, when, I had heard from this epidemiologist that was on, Joe Rogan program, and I was taking notes because he was talking about how, how COVID had impacted China and how it impacted smokers more than anything. And that, with the US, and he was specifically asked, well, do you think that COVID is going to impact, the US in the same way? And he said, it's going to hit us worse because of the obesity epidemic that's gone on in this country. That's it's definitely celebrated now. And he was giving so much, his advice was to make sure you get enough sun and to work out and stay fit, and hopefully you will be okay. And I remember listening to that podcast like in March of 2020, right when everything was, the shit was hitting the fan. And I told him I was already pretty fit, but it was a much more of a conscious effort to try to control what I can control. And since then, it's just been sort of, industry after, I guess, institution after institution is just so, the trust level is so low nowadays that I am so thankful that I was able to listen to different opinions early on during that crisis, because I felt like it really saved my mental health. It saved our family's mental health, and just the concept of ownership of your own health and journey, and how that can lead to a more positive outlook on life, because there's so much unhappiness now that is just permeates throughout the entire country on social media. And I do wonder if that has a strong, I guess, effect. The lack of working out, the lack of going outside, the lack of taking care of yourself, if that is by design, by the institutions at large, not to put on a tinfoil hat theory, but I do firmly believe that, what you just described of what's happening to truck drivers is also happening to, at a large scale, the population of the U.S., where you are just put into this bucket of they want you to be dependent on the state instead of being that self-reliant sort of, the concept of what, I guess, sort of makes, an American is kind of, I guess, where I'm trying to go is, you need some self-ownership. You need to be able to take accountability, and taking care of your health first and foremost sets you up with that strong foundation to take care of every other stressor in life that is going to be eventually thrown at you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's funny you say that about whoever that epidemiologist was, because I'm sure him saying that in an interview probably garnered negative attention from mainstream narratives.
Oh, it was taken down from YouTube, the whole nine. And I thought this was such a nuanced conversation. Why would you, badmouth that? It was clearly by design.
Yeah, and it says a lot about how people view that. That's why and I take that phrase from Andy Frisella, who has said personal excellence is the number one rebellion, because being fit at this point is now a stance of rebellion against that, because there's a narrative being pushed that you don't have to be, when really that's untrue, and it trickles.
It's celebrated too.
Yeah.
It's celebrated being obese, and that's I'm like, you're gonna die 20 years earlier because of this. Why are you listening to this?
Yeah, I'm not saying go out there and berate people for being obese. Like I said,
Sure.
I was 275 pounds at one point, and yeah, I wouldn't like it if I don't want to be absolutely bullied, but there's also like I also don't want to be lied to. Like if a doctor ever told me that, hey, you're on the right path, you're good to go, you could sustain this, for the next 100 years if you want to live for another 100. You're like, no, at that point it's not, but that's where it's headed. In regards to the trucking thing, if health and fitness, and this is how you know the mega carriers don't care about health and fitness, because if they did care, they would create an environment. The employee environment for drivers would be encompassed around it. Like they would be encourage, like all they'll say, and they do this all the time because CSA scores talk about driver fitness is something on CSA scores, and so they give the rhetoric of, oh, you should exercise for 30 minutes a day and sleep 8 hours a night. And it's like, and they tell you what you should do, but it's not about, yeah, it's like, I could tell you what to do too. I could tell you to do things, and this is how you stay healthy, but you need to create the environment where that's the norm. So these companies, they do nothing in regards to health and fitness. Like went just down to the parking level. Like the fact that this job requires you to sometimes park in strange parts of town or Walmart parking lots or something like that. The environment for the truck driver doesn't even encourage this sort of this sort of healthy lifestyle. The amenities that are around for truckers doesn't support this lifestyle. The food that's at the truck stops. At the largest scale, from these top retail truck stops on down, they sell you unhealthy food. The trucking companies don't care. They don't encourage you to grocery shop. They don't pay for you to have an air fryer in your truck. They're not trying to tell you, hey, this is what a diet is. They don't have nutritionists working for their companies. They don't invest in any of this. If they did care about the health and wellness of their drivers, they would do something about it. We have companies that do. I was just talking to a girl the other day. She said that the health insurance from her company pays for a year's subscription of Peloton. Find me a trucking company that does that. Find me a trucking company that has gives you HSA or discounts to go to chiropractors, or for free yoga streaming or something like that. It's not like, that's the thing. It needs to be taking care of yourself and the health and fitness. It needs to be the crux of any employer, because let's face it, you're at your employer more than you're with your own family. And so your employer needs to have it. Your employer is an influence on your life now. It's not like you just clock in, clock out. Maybe it used to be that way in the 80s, but guess what? Work comes home with everybody. People are very into their careers. They're career driven at this point. So, and these companies know that a healthier and more fit employee, a well taken care of and healthy employee, is going to be more productive, more alert, better at what they do, more passionate, perform better. And the same thing applies to truckers. If you want to keep them, eventually it becomes unsustainable for the driver. They fail a DOT physical, whatever pathway they go. These drivers alone, even if they make it their whole career, they probably won't make it to retirement. They could, like, the average age of retirement in the U.S. is 64. The average life expectancy of a truck driver is 61. So even if no matter what, whether you quit the trucking industry or you stay in or whatever, the odds are you're not even gonna make it. So you worked all your life, for these people who kind of took advantage of you, and we're just supposed to thumbs up that it's okay. These people are just casualties of it. Like I hate to sound doom and gloom. Trucking as a whole, as a career, has repurposed me in so many ways. In fact, if you talked to me over 3 years ago, I wouldn't have this level of passion. I wouldn't be this fired up, because I wouldn't care that much. I would just be caring about, getting off work. I work twice as much as I've ever worked, like, in my life, some weeks. And I'm doing more, producing content, training for marathons, helping other drivers with their fitness on the First Form app. I'm doing so much more with less amount of time. Trucking has done that for me. It's such a career that's motivated me in a certain way, but I know that there's problems we just need to fix, because I'm trying to leave the world a better place than when I got it. That's what I'm trying to do. Like, I came into something, I want the next generation of truckers to succeed, thrive, and do well. And there's things along the way that we need to fix, or else they're not going to be able to have it.
So with you creating content, yeah, I think you just celebrated your 69th episode, obligatory nice comment in there. And so you have the privilege of being able to talk to several different people within the industry, leaders, truckers, when I say leaders, I mean leaders that, within the organization inside the company, and also drivers as well, other folks from, that surround the industry. So if you were to give advice to other carriers out there who want to recruit better drivers, who want to retain them once they actually get them through the door, what kind of things have you seen from other companies, or maybe even some of these mega carriers, that should be implemented? Is it a fitness program? Is it full benefits from the day that you start? Is it I guess I don't know what they could do about truck parking, because that's such a a unique situation for every city and state and location. But what are some of those things that some of these smaller carriers could maybe take advantage of and start offering their drivers? And maybe some of the mega carriers are like, what would be that pathway to righting some of these wrongs?
Yeah, I think it might have to change. They may have to change how they route their trucks. They may have to change some operational things, some scheduling things. I think emphasizing work-life balance is huge. So look, and I know that there's tough truckers out there. Look, I've stayed out for 7-8 weeks at a clip before, and hey, I love being over the road. And I just am trying to correct myself and save myself from the critics who are like, well, if you don't like it, get a local job or something. But implement a work-life balance for these over-the-road guys. Create a schedule that is healthy and sustainable for guys who are going over the road. But even for the local jobs, create a system. You're the carrier. The carrier does have the power to tell their customers to actually make a claim, stand up for their drivers and say, hey, this is how we're going to route our trucks. These are going to be the hours. So create a schedule that offers a work-life balance, similar to how a lot of places are going work from home, and how a lot of places are doing hybrids, and a lot of places emphasize, or they're doing 4-day work week type stuff. There's other industries who are evolving to the work-life balance of the talent market out there. Trucking companies can do the same. They don't need to be stuck in the past of trying of doing that and be like, well, we can't change it. It's how it's always been. Come up with a schedule of how you're going to route your trucks that would provide a driver, based off of, I guess, data extrapolated of how often drivers want to go home, and for how long and during which days, because obviously drivers want to be home around weekends because that's when all their family and friends probably aren't working. So it's like, figure out a schedule at that macro level of, hey, this is how we're going to run. Offer the option for guys who want to live on the road, sure, but figure that out. So figure out a scheduling. We have all this access to unlimited data.
I was going to say, that's where maybe AI can come
Yeah,
in and,
like,
and maybe help extrapolate some of that data and help these companies, make it. It feels like it just needs to be a larger priority. If you're going, like you said, if you're going to place these large company-wide discussions, industry-wide discussions around, work from home, 4-day work weeks, what does the modern work schedule look like? These shouldn't be happening in silos where the drivers are in one silo and everyone else is in a completely different silo. That those same perks, those same benefits should be offered, to all of your employees. And it's really baffling as to why that wouldn't already be the case. I would think that, from even like an HR, just a management standpoint, it would just make so much more sense to just have one pay benefits package and be able to offer that to all of your employees, whether or not they're a driver or not.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Couldn't be more spot on. And then next from there, offer a competitive living wage to these people. You want these people to work there for X amount. Like, the turnover has a cost, no matter how we want to view it. And I've learned from speaking with Gord McGill on this that the turnover for some of these mega carriers has been ingrained into their budget sheets. Like, they count on the turnover. They've adjusted their entire business model to include the turnover. Like, that's how much they don't care about it. They know it's a thing, so they've adjusted their whole business model and how they price all things to include the turnover. Imagine if they didn't. Imagine if they just actually paid a living competitive wage, to people with things like PTO, with bonus incentives, and not referral bonus incentives, because some of these bonuses, because it's crazy, some of these even the local carriers, they were offering $10, $15, $20,000 bonuses, but these bonuses were paid out over 2 years, and they're predatory. Like, these bonuses were almost predatory to get people to sign on, because I can't name any job that you can start at where you get a $20,000 bonus. But then again, it's like, some people get promotions where they get a bonus like that, but just be upfront with the pay. So on top of just making a better work-life balance, it's just, and it has to do with going in, looking at the data, figuring out, okay, this is how we should schedule our OTR guys, this is how we schedule the regional guys, etc. And then from there is when you move to pay. Like, start paying a livable wage. Look, but pre-deregulation, and I'm not here to have the union argument or not, because I don't think we can go backwards, and I come from a pro-union sentiment. I don't really want to get down that road. But the thing is, before deregulation, drivers, for the most part, were paid a salary equivalent to six figures in 1960s and 70s term, like based on inflation. Like, what drivers were making in the 60s and 70s was equivalent to six figures today. That was the standard. So raise the standard of that pay. So if they were able to afford it in the 70s, I could tell you right now that Werner, Schneider, these mega Goliath corporations, they can afford it now. Like, the large companies, if they could afford it then, they can afford it now. And because ever since deregulation, I don't know, things aren't becoming cheaper with the advancement of technology, and driving down as the wages have gone down in the past several years in trucking. Anything been getting cheaper this past year? No, I don't think so. I think everything's gone up for everybody. So, the pay is definitely a good one. And then when you adjust their scheduling, yeah, I think implementing a culture of health and wellness, this might piss off, some of my progressive friends, but get rid of your VP of diversity and inclusion and make a VP of health and wellness, because that's what matters more. Your VP of diversity and inclusion, yeah, that's all fun and dandy, but you're going to get the diversity and inclusion by hiring good people. So that's a different argument. Replace that position with the VP of health and wellness. And, I'm not saying go down and send somebody, have somebody bang on their truck and be like, hey, did you do your push-ups today? But hey, come up with workout programs for people. Let them know, hey, the truckers need to hear the hard truth. Hey, this job is killing you. Sitting is the new smoking. And, that needs to be very, very emphasized, at CDL school on training. Hey, this job's actually killing you. It's bad for your blood. Here are the stats. They don't go over these stats enough. And so I think the culture of the business needs to be surrounded by it. You want real people to get real results on their health and fitness. You've got to tell them the truth.
Well, speaking of health and fitness, that's part of your career journey as well. It's part of your personal journey. What are some ways that drivers can, like you and others, can stay fit while out on the road?
Well, I could, I do work as an advisor on the First Form app, and I didn't wear this T-shirt intentionally. I just put it on because I found it. But I work as an advisor to help guys on a health and fitness app which tracks their macros. Your macros being your calories, protein, carbs, and fats, and that varies based on activity level, height, weight. So I can't calculate macros for people, but the app does use technology. And I help coach people on that app, which also has access to workouts, live streams, tracks your steps and stuff like that. So I encourage anybody who wants a help or any sort of coaching, definitely feel free to come find me. I'd love to help you out. But all drivers really need to do, what they need to do to counteract what they're doing is, yes, so they definitely need to watch what they're eating. You shouldn't be, at least monitor your calories. But you definitely need to be getting the right amount of protein, 1 gram of protein per pound of goal body weight. And that starts by eating whole meals. So you got to start cooking your own food. I use an air fryer and microwave. But the number one thing people can start doing now is stop drinking full sugar sodas and going for at least 1 to 2 45-minute walks per day and drinking a gallon of water. Anybody who is facing, who is very obese, anybody who's having a hard time, maybe pre-diabetic, if they start incorporating 1 to 2 45-minute walks and just going to diet soda, their entire life will start changing. From there, it skyrockets. People don't need to do anything crazy. But the thing is, once guys start going for those walks and they start seeing the results, they're going to want more, and they're going to want better for themselves. They're going to want to start running. They're going to want to start bringing out the Bowflex weights at the truck stop. They're going to it burgoynes into a whole bigger thing. Once you start making that progress, you want to do more. You want more for yourself because you deserve it. And you start feeling like you're worth it again. But that's what they do. They need to start. You just need to start. Instead of scrolling, you could scroll while you walk.
So we've talked about, all the issues that are going on within the industry. We've talked about a couple of the good movements that are happening, including the fitness sort of revolution, I think, that's going on with a lot of different drivers. Mark Manera, another, friend of the show and friend of yours as well. He owns Supply Chain Fitness, which is trying to, combat a lot of those preconceived notions, as well as to, the importance of your health and how that impacts the rest of your life and your family, friends, work, all that stuff. But are there any issues in trucking that, are kind of, below the surface right now that you think will become a bigger issue in the years to come?
I think I've briefly I've alluded to it along the lines, but definitely parking is I think the going to become the biggest one, especially as certain major metropolitan areas start to grow, like what once were medium-sized metropolitan areas, Austin, Texas being one. I live in Central Texas, and this is where I'm seeing it. I actually just spoke with a local news, KXAN, about a truck parking going on because Austin's starting to see it as an issue. Even other places, growing metros like Raleigh, North Carolina, Charlotte, Toledo, Ohio. I mean, Florida's, I think, got it some of the worst. I did a truck parking story with Fox 35 a couple months ago, and Fox 35, spoke to, Florida DOT about issues going on in Central Florida as well as down in South Florida, and the amount of parking that they're going to need just based off the growth of the Orlando area and, the amount of people moving to Florida.
South Florida, yeah.
When people move there, your consumption is going to go up. You're going to need, the trucks come with it. And I really think truck parking is such an issue that people aren't ready for. And I know that there's some legislation floating around, Congress about allocating money to states from the DOT for truck parking. And I know that the current Secretary of Transportation has definitely echoed the concern for it. So maybe it's not like it's so much under the radar. But the thing is, it's an issue they knew this was going to be an issue in the 90s, off of studies done in 1994 or 1996. They've known this was going to be an issue for a long period of time. It's coming to roost now because what we're seeing is now the fatalities are happening. Cars are hitting trucks on off ramps that are parked there. The truck parking adds to the turnover. And a lot of this could be alleviated, actually. A lot of the truck parking issues can be alleviated if the ELD mandate was repealed, because the implementation of the ELD, now all of science and research shows that when you add stress to the workplace, it affects workplace safety, no matter what. When something has been added, added stress to your job doesn't make things more safe. So adding the ELD mandate to it and requiring ELDs for people is an added stress level, which has created more tired drivers, more aggravated drivers, and drivers making riskier decisions. The FMCSA personally and intentionally added stress to the industry, making the industry less safe. And the fact that narrative isn't seen by people is frightening. Like our own government implemented something which data now says has made the industry less safe, and more people have died because of it, and we're just going to keep letting it fly. And so, truck parking is an issue, is that underlying issue I'm talking about, but it can be solved in more ways than one. By not,
So it's not just more spaces. It's more just what is it?
Once again, change the workplace environment and the scheduling for these drivers and how they can drive. If they weren't be written to this electronic log and they were running a certain schedule to where finding parking wasn't that much of an issue, depending on how they were routed, as in, hey, they can sleep at shippers and receivers, or they can or they're being routed towards their terminals more. So it's just not a matter of spaces. Hey, let's remove some of the, surveillance technology like the ELD mandate, so that way when they have a half an hour left on their clock and they find themselves in having to go through Austin, they don't have to worry, they don't have to worry about that 30 minutes running out and having to have a DOT violation. So, I mean, there's a lot of different ways we can attack the parking issue, but it's the one issue that not only is adding to the turnover, it's also, once again, the consumer, the other highway users out there are at risk because of, the lack of truck parking. But other underlying issues, I'm sure there are. I can't rail off at the top of my head because pay and park, because that's the thing. It's a spider web. Pay and
Right.
parking are like the two nucleuses or whatever, and then there's other stuff that goes out from there. I know that there's a lot of fraud going on right now, and I like I said, we can get into the Eastern European mafias who operate, their Chicago operations. There's a lot going on with, I recently spoke with the president of Real Women in Trucking, which you have spoken to as well.
Desiree Wood.
Desiree Wood, yeah, and she helps with an organization that has helped drivers who've been abandoned because of these ghost log problems. And there are a lot of these Eastern European outfits who run motor carriers with their own ELD technology that they're able to kind of hack into, and they're able to falsify logs to keep these trucks running. And I get, there's probably some libertarians in the crowd who cheer for that, and yeah, and even though obviously nobody would ever people don't want to drive 20 hours a day. That's not the point. But they falsify these logs, and what's happened is they've sent drivers out, and when these drivers are sleeping or staying in hotels, somebody comes and steals the truck or what have you and takes it from under them, and they don't pay them. So I mean, there is a lot of other underlying issues, like some of these Eastern European syndicates who are running running these motor carriers that are operating outside of the rules and regulations, with
Double brokering too.
Yeah,
And
the fraud of double brokering that's going on in all these different countries like Ukraine, and so that's definitely, that's on a macro point. I'm speaking for driver issues for the most part, but industry wide, I mean, the fraud and crime between what's going on with double brokering is just another cost being rolled onto consumers. Where like the fact that is like we're talking in the news about Target and Bud Light and rainbow T-shirts, and not the fact that the American people are getting ripped off by Eastern European crime syndicates taking control of our own supply chain. Like, what do you think is more important? Target selling a rainbow T-shirt or Bud Light, or the fact that our supply chain is being compromised by Chinese technology companies and Eastern European crime syndicates? What's the better headline for?
well, those topics are too complex for I think or it's perceived as too complex. They would rather just keep us. And when I say they, I mean like the intelligence agencies, big corporations, the government, things like that. They would rather keep us infighting with each other rather than trying to tackle a big problem that they are not incentivized to solve, which kind of feels like a big theme of this show, is that there are many problems that exist in this industry, and very few incentives to actually solve them, unless you're actually running a good moral compass of a company that wants to treat people with respect and wants to, stick around for a while. That to me is, the latter is more of the American dream versus the former.
Yeah, no, it is pretty wild, and I do like how you refer to them as they, because I mean that's the truth. They want, and they're doing everything going on in the trucking industry is mirrored to what's going on in with our politics. The ATA and the mega carriers want to keep drivers divided. They don't want them to agree, because drivers can't even agree when it comes to this overtime for truckers act. Drivers are like, well, I'm not paid by the hour. I'm not paid by, like, they don't see the bigger picture. Like they've gotten truckers so divided. Drivers can't even agree to give themselves a pay raise. Like that's where they're at, and our media and our politics is doing the same thing. They want to keep us. They know that the American people, we've sold all our manufacturing overseas. We've sold our purpose. We're now this information and service economy, to where they're able to control us via the culture wars. So people in their own lives, they're not building things for themselves. They're not building things for their communities anymore. So they have to lay a stake in identity politics, because this is how they know, well, if I support this ideology, then I'm actually helping the world. I'm actually helping my community. If I stand up for this, then I'm defending these people. All the while they're staying divided, while the people at the very top maintain control of anything. And in the meantime, also what's going on is, our supply chain is in the midst of being compromised, because even when we go even further into the AI step of things, we just had a pipeline get hacked recently. Like, are we going to keep the public blind to the fact that eventually, when you take the drivers out, we're going to think that China or Russia isn't going to figure out the means to send the next 9/11 isn't going to, you won't need pilots. you when you've got autonomous, trucks and doing whatever, you're not gonna need it. And when you can control the supply chain, where are we running ourselves at that risk? But yeah, no, the media, there's definitely a syndicate in this country that wants to keep people divided. They're doing it in the trucking industry. That's why I feel like if we can fight for these issues and we keep talking to them in the trucking industry, like it's one crack in the seams. It's because the transportation industry is a micro version of everything we're talking about with the media. And if we could solve the problems here, maybe that positivity and stuff can spread to all the other stuff we're talking about, society and the media.
And I think too that just to sort of bring this conversation home is your part. You're not just talking about the problems. You're actually actively out there being a part of the solution. Because that's where my biggest gripe is with a lot of folks that complain online, is that they will complain about the issue, but they offer no solutions unless it's those quick win solutions that are easily patable on the back, and then you can move on to your life, to the next thing to be fake mad about. But in sort of the modern day environment we do find ourselves in, it is really encouraging to start seeing some of these independent media outlets, coming to fruition, that are getting massive support, whether it's through Substack or whether it's, my favorite news program is Breaking Point's a big supporter of theirs, and other independent media journalists who are shining a light on these topics that, we should be focused more on. And included in that are shows like yours and mine that can talk about these issues and can talk about them for an hour and a half, is kind of what our counter is at right now. And we're not beholden to a news program from a legacy news platform that wants to get us on for 7 minutes at a time, get that soundbite, and rush us out the door. So thankfully, we do have access to these types of platforms for now, so we can continue that hard work of spreading awareness on issues that deserve to be talked about and deserve to be, or have some kind of a solution to that problem. So Mike, this was a great discussion. I feel like we could probably touch on 10 more things, but for the sake of the audience, we will cover those in a few, and not in a few, but in future episodes. So one last question: where can folks follow the podcast, follow your work, get signed up for a fitness program, all that good stuff?
Yeah, I do. First and foremost, I definitely want to mention, because you mentioned finding solutions. So that's the thing. At first, I was a complainer, and then from doing the show, doing everything you just said with, kind of just talking about the issues, is the solutions have come up and the ideas. And making my show and getting into content got me involved with an organization called CDL Drivers Unlimited, and they are a grassroots organization that's been 2 years in the making. And we send the people we send to DC are very popular on social media. Lee and Lisa Schmidt, they go to DC and lobby. They were just there recently talking to the Transportation Research Board and handed them a packet with solutions on some of the things we just talked about, like the fraud of double brokering, pay, a lot of that stuff. So that's the thing. Coming up to the solutions point is the real thing, being proactive. So if you are a driver out there, look at cdldu.com. And look at what joining us. There's a lot of resources for drivers out there. I'm helping spearhead their health and their kind of health and wellness committee, and talking about how drivers can stay healthy. But there's a lot of other things they're going to offer, like mental health services, and other business advice. But other than that, you can find me everywhere at Lombard Trucking, Lombard Trucking. That's Instagram, TikTok. You can find the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, at the Lombard Trucking Show. And yes, if you are a driver out there, and non-driver, if you're in the logistics world, or you could be anybody listening. If you want somebody who sends motivational messages a couple times a week, can monitor, can view what you're tracking, what you're eating, give you some workout tips, download the First Form app. It's $12 a month. I pay to use it, and I've had phenomenal progress. And it gives a lot of services. You can have me as your coach. You search Lombard Trucking on there. And I also want to mention that got a Facebook group, LT Supply Chain Fitness. So if you just want a Facebook group where people talk about meals and stuff like that, so I've started that. Like I said, I'm trying to change the culture and how fitness is viewed in the logistics and trucking world. So, but yeah, everywhere you can. So, but no, I appreciate you having me on. I'm glad we were able to rip this long and for an hour and a half. I definitely the C4 energy drink definitely brought it out of me a little bit. But no, I can't thank you enough for having me on and being able to being able to talk about this stuff. Gord had told me this because I asked him the same question when I had him on my show. I said, how do we fix this? And he said, we got to keep talking. We got to keep talking. We got to keep at it, keep having the conversations with as many people as we can, and manifest the solutions, and just keep the message going. It's the only way to work.
Very well said, because in today's day and age, we're so accustomed now to instant gratification via social media. And so it's an important reminder to let folks know that complex problems require complex solutions, and they're not going to be immediate, but you got to be able to talk about it, and you got to be able to work through it. So you said it best. So Mike, thank you so much for joining the show. We'll have to do this again in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you again.
Absolutely.